I am David Poulsen, and I live down west of Claresholm, Alberta, in the Alberta foothills, ranch country. And I guess I came to the business of mystery as a boy when I began reading my dad's Perry Mason novels and the old pocket books. And I guess that was when I was about 10 or 11 years old. And I'm not sure I understood everything that was going on in those novels, particularly as we got into the kind of trial situations that were a part of every Perry Mason novel. But there was something intriguing to me about those books. And I think that introduction to mystery and the fascination with it has stayed with me literally ever since. Now, I have 27 books that I have written, a number of them for young adult readers. But all along, I have always admired, as I just said, the whole concept of adult mystery and wanted to write some and was afraid to, because I was afraid that I would fail at the thing that I probably wanted to succeed at most. And so for a very long time, I simply didn't try. And I guess if you don't try, you can't fail, but you can't also succeed. Finally, in 2014, I wrote the first of what has turned out to be the first. It was intended to be a one-off at the time, a book called Serpents Rising. And I have a copy of it here for those of you who might be interested in actually seeing it. It was published by Dundurn in Toronto. And I honestly did think that it was going to kind of be a one-off. And it turned out that they liked it well enough to offer me a 4-book contract. And so there are now 4 books in the Cullen and Cobb Mysteries is what they're called. Cullen being a freelance journalist and the narrator of the stories, and Cobb as a former cop now turned private investigator. And they meet up and begin a series of adventures and mystery solving activities over the course of that 4 books. So I'm also, I'll just mention quickly, the Prairie representative on the board of the Crime Writers of Canada. And so I don't want to say a lot more than that. I want to get back to Janice here quite quickly, but I do want to just say that I don't have a very academic look at mystery in the same sense that Janice does. She's much more scholarly on this topic than I am, but I do have a sincere interest, and particularly as I think so many of the writers that we're going to talk about from yesteryear have impacted writers of today, and so that influence, I think, is something that we will probably touch on maybe several times over the course of our time together. So with that, I want to turn it back to Janice and hear about her coming to this whole business of mystery. And of course, she is a writer as well as a scholar on the topic. And so Janice, take it away.
Thank you. Well, I didn't come to it by Perry Mason. I came to it by Trixie Belden. So I went back even a little bit further along the line. But I really got focused on detective fiction when I ended up going back to do an MA in English literature, and decided I really wanted to look at popular culture studies, and I wanted to look at how a genre could be created and grow and evolve. So this was back in the day before you had graduate courses on Star Trek, and I actually had to sit a panel to determine whether or not there was any value in doing a master's thesis on subliterary literature. And I managed to persuade them. And I wrote a thesis on parody and detective fiction and looked at how each step of the way gives homage to the detectives that have gone before and moves and extends the genre and the formula a little bit. But I think it amounted to, I had come back into my master's from the freelance writing realm, and which probably annoyed them anyway. And somebody in the grad lounge very snarkily said to me, because I think I was probably sitting there, with my feet up reading an Agatha Christie, and said, "So I suppose you're going to write a mystery novel now, are you?" And I said, "Yeah, I suppose I am." And I honestly had not thought of it at that point, but that's how the Randy Craig mysteries came about. And interestingly, Miranda Craig goes back from a freelance writing world into the land of academe to do her master's degree, and starts out by doubting the credibility of her thesis advisor and thinking that maybe she's a murderer. She then moves into various elements of academe, and so, but also looking at concepts of social justice. So instead of, I would place her on the spectrum as gifted amateur within this, according to Julian Simons, what he would have called the farceur school, because Randy Craig has a good sense of humor. But it's very much along the lines that that V.I. Warshawski and Kinsey Milhone and all of these sort of North American feminist, socially conscious detective novels. So that's where she fits in. But meanwhile, push a button and I can tell you more than you ever want to know about the history of detective fiction. So that's, I think, why I got invited.
All right. Well, with that, maybe we can kind of get into the discussion. Now, you had sent off kind of an outline to me of some of the topics you thought we might touch on, and if you want to kind of kick off a little bit of an introduction into where you think we can. Obviously, we can't cover everything or every. When you think about, we could spend a week just talking about the Scandinavian school of mystery writing. So we're going to have to narrow it down some, but you had some thoughts on that, picking it up sort of post Poe and moving forward from that through the Golden Age and so on. So maybe take us through some of that and we can kick that around.
Well, Edgar Allan Poe is considered the father of modern detective fiction because you don't really want to go back into looking at biblical stories, et cetera, et cetera. But Poe was one of those amazing creatures who thought up things and then decided to do it, did it, and then got bored and moved on. And he developed the term ratiocination, which I've always thought was an incredibly fun word, a neologism that shows up with Poe first, and it's like ratiocination, and it's a combination of the rational and the imaginative. And he thought that the perfect story had to have both. And so with the murders in the Rue Morgue, he creates this horrific murder that no one can solve, but of course it's created by it's a locked room mystery, but it's an orangutan that goes up the chimney and escapes, etc., etc. So he wrote 5 mystery stories and then moved on, but he gives us the locked room mystery, the cryptography mystery, the murder in plain sight, the evil twin element of the purloined letter, because we have, and of course the great detective with Auguste Dupin. And when you get Poe moves on and starts creating horror, but people like Arthur Conan Doyle take on the gauntlet, and you get in the very first Sherlock Holmes story references to Dupin as if he's a real character. So Sherlock Holmes is going, oh, well, yes, he's, rather an inferior character, this fellow, and, far too eccentric in this sort of deal. But of course, there we have Dupin, who has an amanuensis who writes everything down and is his speaker for us. He is totally eccentric. He only goes out at night. He is the brightest person in the universe, and he's probably a dope fiend. And then you move on and you get, again, an eccentric who has a sidekick, who writes everything down, who probably has a drug problem, who is the brightest person in London, et cetera, et cetera. And the thing I started to notice as I read and read and read, I read so much detective fiction within a space of a very short time that I could tell what was going on at page 60. And I thought, oh my God, I've ruined my favorite toy. But it came back. But the thing you start to discover is that there is always a reference to detective fiction in detective fiction. That we always have our detective reading a detective novel, or somebody going, who do you think you are, Lord Peter Wimsey, or something to that effect. And it's the weirdest double negative that there is, because we hand our readers a book and decide, you have to believe wholeheartedly in this world I'm presenting to you. And then you remind them that there's such a thing as detective fiction, which is what they're reading. But I think what readers think is, well, they wouldn't talk about fiction if it wasn't real. So let's move it into the realm of reality rather than just genre fiction. So anyway, we move from Conan Doyle. We go into the age, what they refer to as the golden age of detective fiction, which is the time between the wars when you had the Detection Club, and you have people like Agatha Christie and Dorothy L. Sayers and Freeman Wells Croft, and all of the people who like to create puzzle mysteries. It was said that every British Dawn in a university referred to detective fiction as that twaddle, and they all were writing one. But you move into that, and then at the culmination of World War II, you start to see the rise of the hard-boiled novels happening in the States. And the interesting thing about them is that while they are a reaction to the cozy murder in the vicarage kind of golden age novel, they don't actually have an awful lot of similarities. They are far more connected to chivalric romance, with the knight errant riding out to save the damsel in distress and the loathly lady and the fisher king and all of that kind of thing. And in fact, if you look at the titles of Raymond Chandler novels, they're all dealing with chivalric romance. There's the lady in the lake and that sort of thing. So and he was once admitted that his Philip Marlowe was named as an anagram for Mallory. So there's that happens. And now we get the North American school of the hard-boiled, where Chandler talks about Dashiell Hammett and says Hammett gave murder back to people who actually commit it, rather than the vicar, killing somebody in the middle of the living room. So we're getting into more gritty rather than crossword puzzle with characters kind of novel as we move into the later part of the 20th century. And this is the point where you start to see really strong nationalistic concepts coming out. Like you'll have the Canadian mysteries became much more, starting with Howard Engel, like a little bit more connected to political and social constructs, and a lot more puzzling and looking at character and why things would happen, because there wasn't that much in the way of guns. It was really, it would be unbelievable to our readers to have put that many guns into the hands of the criminal cases that within the, in the late 80s, early 90s. You get the Mexicans moving into a much more politicized version of mystery fiction, where because they have a corrupt police force, and their writers are getting killed on the basis of what they put in their mystery novels. The same happens in a variety of places in Middle Europe where things are politically based, and so you have a surging argument in the international mystery levels where people start to get very upset with each other. One camp saying this is entertainment and that is all it purports to be, and to make it anything more than that is to get beyond your station. And other people, for instance, somebody like Paco Taibo III, whose own father had been killed in the streets for running a newspaper, who said, no, this is the only outlet we have to let the populace know, what is really true and moral and should be. So there's your general line of puzzle story into golden age, and then a shift in from the cozy to the hard-boiled, and then moving into much more socially conscious literature, politically motivated literature, and the other interesting thing about detective fiction as it moves along is that there's very much the marginalized character, whether it be the homosexual, the Black, the woman, the who else is on the outskirts? But you have people in mystery fiction who are marginalized in mainstream fiction, showing up in mystery fiction a good 15 to 20 years before they are celebrated in mainstream fiction. And I think that has an awful lot to do with the resilience and voraciousness of this genre. People make it their own, and so many people love writing it, love reading it, that it grows without being without just staying the same old story that you've always read. So there's your literary historical stream. So back to you, Dave.
Well, you talked about the beginnings of Hard Boiled, and I wanted to maybe pick up on that a little bit. First of all, I think I want to give a little bit of a shout out to our old friend John Buchan, Lord Tweedsmuir, who later became the Governor General of Canada and brought about, by the way, the Governor General's Awards that are rather important to all of us. And I think certainly the 39 Steps is critical and a really important moment in time in terms of the development of the mystery, and in particularly in espionage novel, and one of the first of that particular genre now, or subgenre. Now you talk about the hard boiled, and one of the things that's interesting with Buchan's 39 Steps is that it was actually first published in a kind of a pulp magazine that was popular at that time, and I think it was called Blackwoods, actually. And that's interesting too, because when you talk about people like Hammett and Chandler, there's a very important magazine that's inaugurated in 1920 called The Black Mask, and it's kind of surprising because the co-founder is H.L. Mencken, not exactly a name you'd attach to mystery writing, and yet he was actually working on editing another publication that needed an injection of funds, and thought that possibly this mystery magazine might help with that. So brought about The Black Mask, very, very important, because That's where Dashiell Hammett got his start. That's where Chandler got his start. That's in fact where even Earl Stanley Gardner, our good old Perry Mason friend, began in The Black Mask. So that was really important. And I think one of the things that really intrigues me about Hammett and Chandler is that they brought us, and you alluded to it, Janice, they brought us a different kind of detective. We got away from the gentleman detective of the golden age and got a lot more gritty and got, like the Continental Op, for example, of Hammett's. You think about him, and really what you're talking about there is sort of early John Rebus, Rankin's great character. A lot of really interesting things about that guy, and he's disillusioned and he's disheveled and but he's really a kind of a interesting guy, never ever named other than the Continental Op in all of the stories that were written about him. And the other thing that's important about The Black Mask is that, yes, they were short pieces or short stories, but that was really important with Chandler because, of course, what Chandler did is take 2 or 3 of his own short stories and create from them, meld them into a novel, and his great novels came from that process. So there's something else.
That's the same with Hammett. He didn't write anything except 8 short stories that turned into 8 novels.
Yeah, and that, again, I guess that publication and others like it, and we still have a number of really important publications of short mystery fiction now, even today, and they are important. So I just thought that, and the other thing that happens along this time, and has become more and more evident, is, that's why I think mystery is sometimes given a bad rap, is that we're not just writing whodunits anymore. We are talking about the greater societal issues in a lot of the books by a lot of our best mystery writers. And I think that's really important too, because we've kind of taken it to another level. If I go back to my old friend Perry Mason, there wasn't a lot of character development. Perry Mason was exactly the same in the last Perry Mason novel as he was in the first Perry Mason novel. And a lot of the stories they're certainly formulaic with the trial and so on. We've moved from that, and they were good books and obviously very, very popular, but we've gone far beyond that now. And I think that's one of the things that endears me to mystery reading. Even if I wasn't a mystery writer, I would love to read mysteries because I do think that they are an important part of our literary landscape.
I think there was a point where we tried to figure out the timing, and we realized that Hercule Poirot would have been 137 years old in the last Agatha Christie, but of course he's not. It's like, every single mystery takes place 20 minutes after he has just moved as an emigre, a retired emigre after the war. But I think it first hit me when I was reading, I did an awful lot of book reviews. I had a column in the Edmonton Journal for years called If Words Could Kill. And I reviewed Walter Mosley, and I had loved Devil in the Blue Dress. And so I picked up the next book, and he killed Mouse. And I couldn't get over it. Like, how can you introduce your sidekick, wonderful, amazing character, and then kill him? And every book that follows in Mosley's Easy Rawlins series picks up a child, or he marries somebody, or he grows his family and he develops his world. And what you realize is that that's a powder keg waiting to happen, because Easy Rawlins comes back from the war and gets on the GI Bill, goes to school, gets money, buys a couple of apartment buildings in LA, but he's living in Watts, and as a Black man in LA, and we're moving from the 50s towards the Watts riots. With every book, we're getting closer and closer and closer. But that had never happened before, where you actually saw the evolution of a character. I mean, when Kinsey Milhone's last book happened, I think she was only on her second little black dress. Everything takes place with, she was still writing within the late 80s is when, and I mean, the whole rationale for that was not to have a cell phone and not to have to deal with all of the technology that would have made things problematic. But there are worlds that are evolving and characters who are getting older, and I think maybe some of it is a quid pro quo with the way television has become these mini series, and you binge and you follow a larger story arc. So we're getting series that have that exceedingly complex background story arc, so that you want to read the next book, not just because you like the characters and you like where they take you, but because there is an extra element of sociological interest or puzzle or political problem that's happening between the characters above and beyond each separate mystery that they're dealing with. And that's kind of exciting. It's neat what everybody brings to it.
I noticed a comment from one of our guests, Tony King, I think, was talking about Benny Cooperman, and certainly a favorite of Canadian readers and far beyond, because Howard Ingalls, Benny Cooperman, one of the great Canadian detectives of all time. But the other thing that I wanted to talk about too is the influence of some of those earlier writers on later writers. And for example, I know Robert B. Parker talked about how much he was influenced by Chandler. And then Harlan Coben turns around and says, well, 90% of us mystery writers admit to being influenced by Robert B. Parker, and the other 10% are lying. So there's that continuum of influence that comes down from the masters to the present day, and I think that's one of the real gifts of, in addition to their writing, what they gave us in terms of that influence.
Well, there's the thing, and that's the beauty, is that every novelist creates their own antecedents. There's in an Amanda Cross novel, Kate Fansler is walking down the street with her friend saying, now, if we were Lord Peter Wimsey, this is what we'd be doing. And so she automatically says, this is a character who believes in Dorothy L. Sayers' world and values it. Then you get somebody in a Lawrence Block novel who is reading Parker, or you get somebody, I think James Lee Burke's character tends to read Scudder novels, like the Lawrence Block novels and this kind of thing. So there's the ways in which they tip their hat to people who have gone before. But there's also that sense where, remember Agatha Christie's Tommy and Tuppence, where they decide they're put in charge of a detective agency because it's actually a Russian front. Every chapter they're allowed to actually take on cases while they're waiting for the Russians. And every chapter is done as a different detective who was popular at the time. And Tuppence says, well, of course we can do this. I know everything about detecting because I have read every mystery novel. And that's the sense of it. If you can, that the characters that we create are not dismissive of the world in which they inhabit. And that's not true for so many genres. There's a sense in which we have a self-fulfilling admiration society that happens within detective fiction.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of, I like that as well. One name I wanted to throw out, and it was interesting. A couple of people have made comments about Ace Atkins and how he picked up on the Robert B. Parker series, the Spencer series, after Robert B. Parker passed away, and that's a whole other topic, is because that does happen where other writers now pick up the gauntlet after the first writer has passed on. But
Or just gets tired of it. Lee Child's brother's taking over, isn't he?
yeah, yeah. Well, and Hillerman's daughter picked up on his series. But what about one name I wanted to throw out and get a reaction from you? Because I'm not sure. I really loved the books, but I'm not sure where exactly I put Rex Stout and Nero Wolfe and Archie Goodwin and
Well,
in terms of their
Baroness Zorzi wrote The Old Man in the Corner, and she comes about in the golden age of mystery fiction. She's the contemporary of, Freeman Wells Croft and of the Father Brown stories and stuff like that. And The Old Man in the Corner never leaves the restaurant, and people come to him and he sends people off and says, oh, figure this out or do this. And it's the puzzle of the mind. And so, Nero Wolfe is just like a direct descendant of that character, where he sends Archie out, but he never leaves. But then he and his orchids are a tip of the hat to Agatha Christie, because Poirot wants to go off and grow squash, right? Like zucchinis. And Inspector Bucket, who shows up, he's the first policeman that shows up in British literature in Bleak House. He wants to go off and grow roses as something to do. So there's this idea of, once you get past all of the blood and mayhem, you go and garden. And so that's the Nero Wolfe tip of the hat too.
Yeah, and you think about going back to the hard boiled, and I was thinking about some of the other writers that certainly have probably had an influence on me, because I read a lot of them, including Nero Wolfe. But you think about the John D. MacDonalds, you think about Ross MacDonald, the Canadian or part Canadian / American. And then, of course, there's always Mickey Spillane. And what do you do with that? I mean, they were just so darn popular, and boy, oh boy, I want to say so darn bad, but that's not fair. They couldn't have been that bad if they were that darn. And yeah, people had a crush on Archie Goodwin. I believe that. I believe he was the perfect wisecracking detective helping out Nero Wolfe. But back to Mickey Spillane. What would be your reaction to that sub genre?
Well, you're always going to have. I mean, there's something of the. He's the sort of bastard son of Dashiell Hammett, right? Because he is that character who lives between the worlds. And that was Hammett and Chandler's vision of the detective, that the detective was so successful because he could move between worlds. He walked in the front door of the mansion because he was hired to do so, but he lived and had his office down with the grifters and was possibly a little closer to them. And so I think, Spillane comes out of the whole pulp fiction kind of yellow novels and stuff, but he and it's an interesting twist on things, because he really is much more of a misogynist than either Chandler or Hammett. I mean, both of them tend to the women give as good as they get, and there's a much stronger egalitarian line in both of those series of novels than there is in a lot of sort of pale imitators. Yeah.
One topic, just to move off in another direction, that you and I had chatted about on the phone is sort of the whole Canadian group, and you know, we've already had a chat about Howard Ingle and Benny Cooperman, but even if we get to some of the modern day Canadian stuff, and how does, in your view, and I have some thoughts about this as well, how does Canadian crime fiction differ from some of the other crime fiction that's out there, notably our neighbors to the south, obviously, but others as well? What are your thoughts?
Well, I was interviewing Eric Wright years ago, and I said, you know, like, do you think we're that kinder, gentler nation that George Bush was looking for? And he said the truth he thought behind why we were less wildly crazy, like we're far more realistic when it comes to detective fiction. The things that happen are believable. The people are much more believable. And his rationale, now he was a landed immigrant into Canada, so he sort of saw North America with a lens of the other, but he saw people in the States as you get novels in the States set in New York or in Chicago or in LA, and all of the flyover people read these novels and go, oh yeah, I'll bet that happens over there, because those are bad places. And but the truth is that a lot of the United States, I think there's like 70% of people in the US have never left their own state, let alone traveled widely. And the way Canada was settled, we tend to move across the land. And I don't know whether we're just really good at having convenient people living in convenient places, but it would be impossible to create, you know, a wild, massive Chinese Tong race war happening in Saskatoon, because most of us have an uncle or an aunt or a cousin or an old roommate from university or somebody living in Saskatoon, or you've lived there yourself. And the same goes for anywhere across Canada. So he said, we are forced by the fact that our readers are so attuned across the country to be more believable and to be more tied into the world that we have placed our people in. Whereas a lot of the US tended to be much more, oh, well, things are violent and there's gangs in LA, or everybody is, going to die on the subway in dirty old New York, or, something of that extent, because the readership was far more likely to be naive to that. So that said, I think Canadians do carve out a much more connected to the land that they place their characters in, and that probably comes back to the whole Canadian ethos. Somebody once said at a writing conference, "Why do you think Canadians are so focused on the land in their novels?" And Margaret Atwood said, "Because in Canada, the land can kill you." So we are far more respectful of where we place our people.
I think that's really true, and obviously Giles Blunt is a perfect example of that with the Cardinal series and the northern Manitoba landscape and climate and so on.
Ted Wood was setting all of his characters up. He had a mystery series with an ex-Mountie up in cottage country, and yes. That was very much, if the murderer didn't get you, the ice would.
Well, and Deverell, of course, with his fictional island of Garibaldi, and and that's just so much fun. All of Deverell's writing, I think, had a
Lawrence
chance
Block.
to spend. Yes, there's just a whole bunch of them. But one thing we probably need to do, because we wrap in about 8 or 9 minutes, is make sure that we open it up to folks who would like to. We've been getting some great comments, several about Nero Wolfe, and a number of people expressing their deep-seated love for Archie Goodwin, and that's very good. But we've also got, I'm sure, some questions and some comments from folks that might like us to react to some of their thoughts as well. So please feel free to send those along, or jump on board if you're not muted, and because this could nurture be a conversation. We don't just want to lecture. But with that, are the newer batch of
What are emo police detectives?
police to emo?
Sorry, that was an accidental P. That it's emo detectives. The very sad, depressed emo detectives that seem to be everywhere now.
I think they tend to have come out of P.D. James's poetry writing dog leash, and you get a sense of the policeman who has to prove that he still has the humanity to do the job.
So we certainly get that in Louise Penny and that series with Dalglish, and so I would second that. I think that's very, very true.
And Elizabeth George's characters in her series set in England, and who else? I don't read that many police procedurals anymore. Who else would you call emo? Oh, Bosch? Yeah. I like Bosch. I don't really care for the TV series, but because I think that guy's a little too wooden for who Harry Bosch is in my mind.
I agree. I like Bosch too. The written Bosch.
Yeah.
As opposed to the televised Bosch, yeah.
Can you guys comment on cozy detective fiction, if that's a modern thing or has been around for a while?
You know, it really is more modern. People tend to think of cozies as being Agatha Christie, but she was pretty violent and pretty political. Whereas you move into the anything where there's a frickin' talking cat, or people, somebody who has a job that takes them, or makes them write recipes into the middle of the book, or they own a bookstore and everybody who comes in dies, or this sort of thing. It tends to be much more formulaic, and I think it has to be. Like the people I know these days that are writing cozies are sort of given the characters and given the world that they're supposed to be writing in by the publishers, and so they write 7 or 12 bookstore mysteries or caterer mysteries or secondhand store mysteries, or then they're sort of 3-step from Harlequin, and I'm so sorry if somebody behind one of those windows is actually making a lot of money doing it. Joke's on me.
I wouldn't be sorry for them. Good for them.
No, I mean, I'm sorry if I was insulting them.
So we've been getting a number of comments, and appreciate those. We may not get a chance to address them all, but we darn sure do appreciate you guys jumping in and adding your voices to what's going on. What are you reading right now, Janice? In the mystery genre.
What am I reading right now? Yikes. That's a good question. I have been reading sort of a gothic-y kind of thing. Sarah Perry from England, who wrote The Essex Serpent and Melmoth. So it's much more gothic than straight mystery. But who do I like that's, oh, you know who I really like right now is a woman named Catherine Ryan Howard. She's just brought out a book called The Nothing Man, which is about a survivor of a serial killer has written a book about a serial killer, and the serial killer is reading it. But her best book, I think, is called The Liar's Girl. And that one just floored me. She's Irish. I really like her. And
any others out there who are reading something that they totally would like to share? Here's a question: where do the Grafton and Ivanovich mysteries fit in?
Well, Grafton is technically a PI, but they tend to be what Julian Simons referred to as the farceur school, and that's very much the more lighthearted take on detective fiction. So the wisecracking, jokey kind of mystery novel.
And you know, I go back to William Deverell and the fact that we can have an awful lot of fun with the mystery genre too, and certainly the cast of crazy characters that he populates his Beecham novels with, and including Beecham himself, and certainly his wife. That's just an awful lot of fun. We can have fun with the genre, in addition to the fun of actually reading mysteries.
Well, we better be having fun with it. It's not like it pays.
Good point. So we just have a couple of minutes left. Unless there are further questions or comments, wanted to thank Janice first of all for being along for the ride. And gosh, this was a lot of fun today. And I think you certainly shared a lot of information that I enjoyed hearing, as I hope our guests did as well. And to all of you who joined us today, thank you so much for doing that. And we hope that you enjoy the rest of the conference. It's obviously a conference with a difference, but good on these guys for being able to have it and make it happen in spite of all of the stuff that's going on around us. So thank you for joining us, and
thank you.
Last word to you.